tonight we're having the, okay, so tonight we are
I don't
having
know what's going on, but I don't know if it's happening with everybody else, but for some reason, I can't start the video, and I've never had that happen before.
oh no.
I wonder, I don't see anybody else's pictures. I wonder if that's happening with them as well.
Oh gosh, perhaps, I don't know. I'm not the host.
Yeah, I'm on the same boat here.
My video's working.
Yeah, we have some videos working. Check the box at the lower left of the screen. There we go, where it says start video. You have to hit that. If it's got the red X through it, red mark through it, your video is not on. For example, when I click it, then you can see me. And when I click it off, it goes back. So click on your start video. Thank you.
Super weird. It's just, I'll work on it. It's just, I'm doing that. I'm familiar with this, and it's just, but don't worry about me. Just keep going.
Okay. All right. Well, as everyone's getting settled, definitely get out all of your bottles of wine. I see Maria there is completely ready with all of her bottles open. So great job. You want to, yes, and snacks. Oh my gosh, even better. I'm loving it. So yeah, pop open all those bottles of wine. And there's a little plastic thing on the top. And if you just peel the perforated section, it will come off and it will be pretty easy to peel. Just be careful, it's a little bit sharp. So just kind of watch your hand there. All right, so while you're at it, while you're opening those wines, go ahead and pour yourself a glass of that first wine. It's going to be the Pinot Gris. So it's right here in this kind of like teal blue label. Yeah, it's the white wine. And that'll be our first one. And I will say, as a little bit of a, just an FYI, is that each of these bottles contains about a quarter bottle of wine. So while they're small, they're kind of deceiving. And if you were to drink all 6 bottles tonight, you'd be drinking a full bottle and a half of wine. So I just like to tell people that, I don't want anyone being surprised when we get to the end and, they're like, whoa. So yeah, I always like to give people that, but do with that information whatever you want, no problem about that. All righty. So I'm going to kick us off with a little info just about In Good Taste so that you all can hear just a little bit about the winery so you kind of know what we're about. You can know that our wines are awesome and legit. That's kind of another reason why I want to share, and also our mission. So feel free to start sipping on that first wine, just going to be the Pinot Gris. So I'll put it in the chat here. First wine, it's the Pinot Gris. And, having a glass of water on hand is good. Having some snacks is also great. So, get comfy because we're about to spend a really great time together, having so many different wines. It's going to be awesome. All right. So to start us off, In Good Taste. Now we are a wine producer based out of Sonoma, California. And I like to talk about this because I feel like it's not always known, but there are a lot of winemakers that actually don't own their own vineyard. We're one of them. Okay. We actually purchase grapes and juice from small family-owned vineyards around the world. And that is not totally uncommon. I will say a lot of winemakers will decide to do that rather than owning their own vineyard, just because for the first 5 years that you start a vineyard, you're really not profitable because it takes a while to grow the grapes. And then of course you have to, actually make your wine, and that takes about a year or two. So it's kind of been, a little bit more economical, one, to purchase grapes and juice from other growers, but it actually fits more of the In Good Taste mission. And that is really to allow people to explore as much wine as possible in really high quality kind of pours by the glass. And the thing I love about the mini bottles is that there is no large investment in buying a full bottle and risking whether or not you're going to like it and if you can finish it. So that's really kind of our thing, is more like these different collections of wine so we can try a bunch of different things and just start to feel really comfortable with wine and what all is out there. So to having the Cascades wine collection. So another thing to have handy is also this little booklet here, which should have come in your box. And this is really great because the tasting notes are in here. So as we're tasting, it's really helpful to be sipping the wine while reading the tasting notes, and I'll talk to them too. And it's just going to help you kind of pick up the aromas a little bit better. And yeah, and just to kind of close us out on In Good Taste, also our winemakers, Matt Smith and Ashley Neely, they have had decades and decades of experience with with In Good, well, just with winemaking, actually not with In Good Taste, with winemaking in general. And before coming to In Good Taste, Matt Smith was the director of wine over at Kendall Jackson. So if you've been familiar with Kendall Jackson as a wine brand, they have a lot of, wine out in the market, good stuff. So we know that we're going to be having some delicious wines tonight. Alrighty, and since our videos don't seem quite to be working, if you guys get a chance and you have a really beautiful setup of your wines and your cheese, sort of like how I see Maria has hers, feel free to tag us on Instagram, because I really like to see like what everyone is doing on the other side of the during the taste. So feel free to snap a photo and tag us in it, because I selfishly want to see it. Alrighty. So let's get into it. So cheers, everyone, with your first wine here. We got the Pinot Gris. Cheers. Raise a glass. I can feel that you all are raising your glasses with me, which is really exciting. All righty. Awesome. Okay, so tonight is all about Cascade wines, and what that is that we are focusing on wines from Washington State. So we're going to get really granular with Washington State, all the different types of grapes here, and we're really, the goal for the winemakers and for our wines for this collection was to really give you guys a true taste of what Washington State is all about. So these wines are made in a way that is sort of the methodology of Washington State wine, so that we're getting the best representation of that, which is really awesome. So as we go through, feel free to drop questions in the chat box as you think of them, and I'll pause to answer them throughout. And then of course, I'll leave some moments open where you all can unmute and ask questions if you have any. So don't hesitate to ask questions. I always like to say there's no dumb questions, just drunk ones. And those are also okay too. Alrighty. So if you have been to a wine tasting before, whether it's at a winery or virtually, drop a 1 in the chat. So I have been to a tasting before, so I'm going to put a 1 in there. I'm just curious to see how many, people have really explored wine before. All right, awesome. Yay. Okay, so we have maybe half. I'm kind of guessing here. All right, well, something that you may have heard when you're at a wine tasting is the 5 steps to wine tasting. And I always like to refresh people with those, just because they are one of the most fundamental things when you're really diving into wine and wanting to really understand what they are all about. So those 5 steps are see, swirl, sniff, sip, and savor. And I love to walk through these because it really forces you to slow down and get to know the wine in your glass. And so for a tasting like this, we're being a little more intentional than maybe, if you're just at a random wine bar and you just want to try a bunch of wines. Like today, we're really going to be talking about how do we actually taste wine and what are we looking for? And then kind of making our conclusions on whether or not we like it based off of that. So that's where we're going to kind of start. So pick up that glass of that Pinot Gris. And I will say that I have had all of these wines, but I leave some left in the bottle and they kind of go bad after some time because I just am not drinking them because I want to show, the wine in the bottle. So even though I have a different, a red in my glass here, don't worry, I've had all these wines before, but I just don't have any fresh versions of these because I do too many tastings to get a new box every time. Alrighty. So that Pinot Gris first, and the first step to be when we're looking at our wine is to see. So pick up your glass and hold it out in front of you at about a 45-degree angle and look down on top of it. That's really the best way to see the color. Ideally, you also want to have a piece of white paper or a white surface underneath your glass so you can really get a true sense of the color. Now, you may see people holding up the glass to the light and that sort of thing, and that's okay, but one, you run the risk of it falling on, dropping wine on your face, and you also are getting more of the reflections of the room around you rather than the actual true color of the wine. So that's why I always like to encourage people to look down on top of the wine and having their glass out at an angle in front of them. So when you're looking at the wine here, the color can tell us a few different things. And this is kind of where professional wine tasters start to really be able to guess what the wine is before they even taste it. And I'm not quite an expert yet with the colors, but I will say that sometimes I can look at a wine and be like, I think I might know what this is. So when we're looking at the Pinot Gris, right away, we know it's a white wine. So of course we're expecting, white wine, which hopefully, and the other thing to note is that it's very pale, very light colored white wine. If you have yourself unmuted, just please mute for a moment, and then I'll open up the room for questions if you have any. All right. So when we're looking at this color of wine here, it's very, very light. It's almost like water. And anytime I see that, I'm starting to think, okay, like this wine probably won't be as intense in flavor as other wines that have a little bit deeper color. And that's sort of a generalization. You can definitely have wines that sort of surprise you, but in this sense, because I know it's also Pinot Gris, it's just not going to be as intense as that next white that we're going to have. So it's kind of the first thing it's telling us. And I will also say color wise, you know, it's a lemony clear sort of color, but there's a little hint of green to it. And anytime I see that, I'm always thinking that, okay, we're probably going to get some citrus aromas in the wine, because usually that is what it's indicating. So that's some notes on color. And our next step is going to be to swirl. So go ahead and swirl the wine in your glass. This is really, I like to tell people, this is your touchdown dance. You can do whatever you want here. Like there's no wrong way to swirl. Just don't spill it. That's really the only faux pas. So go ahead and swirl the wine in your glass. And this is allowing the wine to aerate so we can smell it a little bit better. And it kind of lifts the aromas out into the top of the glass. So once you've done that, take a little sniff. And as you're sniffing, the first thing to do is just get over the fact that it's wine. You know, that's kind of the hardest thing for people to get past sometimes. And so it's just a little bit, you know, don't worry about that. So after you've kind of gone past the fact that you are having a glass of wine, the next thing to do is starting to look for some different aromas. And I will say that when I first started with wine tasting, one of the biggest questions I had was, gosh, like how does wine get so many flavors? Because we're going to be talking about a lot of different stuff, like a lot of flavors. Just get ready. You'll even see it in the book and in this little booklet. And so 3 areas where wine gets its flavors. One is the grape variety. And so right now we're talking about Pinot Gris specifically. And Pinot Gris in general has typical aromas of white flowers, peach, mandarin orange. So kind of start to look for those as you're taking a sniff here. Also go ahead and reference the booklet. And as you're reading the words, sometimes it kind of helps you pick up some of the aromas in the wine. So that's one place where wine gets its aromas. It's just the grape variety itself. I kind of liken grape varieties to like apples in the sense that like you have the general apple, right? But then underneath the apple, the general apple, you have like Granny Smith and Red Delicious and Honeycrisp and all of these other flavors. And it's the same thing for wine grapes. You have the general, you know, like Vinus vinifera wine grape species, and then underneath that, many different flavors and varieties. So that's one place where wine is getting its flavors, is just the different varieties. And then the second place is where the wine is grown. And this is actually a French term called terroir. And terroir, it means that the grapes taste like where they are grown, like the land and the climate really affects the flavor. So in this case, we'll talk a little bit about how Washington State and the climate affects wines. But I will say one of the best examples I can give you to really understand terroir is if you have a Sauvignon Blanc from either, California or from France, and then you have and you have that compared to a New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc, you will see that they are very, very different. I mean, similar flavors a little bit with the citrus and all that kind of stuff with the Sauvignon Blanc, but the New Zealand version is just very, very pungent, has a lot more gooseberry and grapefruit aromas, whereas the French version will tend to be a little bit more, depending on where it is grown in France, you could have more like of a wet stone minerality flavor and less of that intense pungent aroma. So that's kind of one of my easiest ones, most approachable. I feel like most people have had a New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc. So that's just an example of terroir. And then our third thing is winemaking techniques. And the winemaker can choose to do a few things. And one of the most prominent ones that will actually smell in the wine glass is whether or not a winemaker used an oak barrel in their winemaking process. And that usually leans aromas of vanilla, oak, of course, woodsy kind of smells. So that's kind of that third layer of flavor. So with all that being said, let's go back to our Pinot Gris here. And is anyone here getting any other aromas than what I mentioned? So as you're sniffing, start looking for those white flowers. We got some peach, maybe a little bit of mandarin orange. This booklet here mentions some apples, and you can disagree with it. It's okay. But I will say in general, Pinot Gris is known for the floral and the stone fruits and a slightly like citrus kind of mandarin orange kind of aroma. All right. So if you have any comments about the aromas or you want to ask a question, now is a really great time to unmute, or you can drop it in the chat. Mhm. All right. Well, hopefully, I guess that means we're all getting some. Okay, this one's delish. Love it. All right. Yes. I love that. I mean, this is a really light white wine. So if you take a sip here, if you haven't already, you'll notice that it's not super heavy on your palate. It's very light in flavor. I love this comment in here from Armene saying that it's very friendly. Yes, very friendly. Yeah, it's a really nice, great starter wine because it's not too heavy. It's not gonna like overpower, your palate with too much flavor. It's just a really good, like easy sipping kind of white wine. And something that I wanted to point out that's kind of special about this is that Pinot Gris actually has like a kind of a twin. It's sort of a clone of it, and it's called Pinot Grigio. So Pinot Gris and Pinot Grigio essentially are the same grape. They're just grown in two different places. So Pinot Gris traditionally comes from Alsace, France, which is a wine region right on the border of France and Germany, kind of in that the southeastern corner of France, very close to like Switzerland. And so this area is a little bit cooler. So Pinot Gris does really well here. And Pinot Gris is, well, this version of the Pinot Gris or Pinot Grigio grape is known to be a little bit riper and richer than Pinot Grigio from Italy. And it's just basically just because of the grape variety being a slight, it's like a clone of itself. So it's got a little bit different like DNA, some different characteristics, but also being grown in Alsace, it just gets a little bit richer, like riper pear and peach notes and those like more intense flavors. The color of the fruit on the vine is also a little bit of a grayish, like white wine, like white grape color. And so that's why Gris is part of the name. And its twin over in Italy is called Pinot Grigio, and that one is known to have more lemon and lime flavors, so it's more citrusy. And I will say that if you are having a Pinot Gris or Pinot Grigio from somewhere in the US, depending on what they're using on the label is what you can kind of start to expect. So if you see Pinot Gris, that means they used a Pinot Gris grape, which means you're going to be getting more of that richer, riper style. But if you see Pinot Grigio on the label, you can expect more of a citrusy style. So it's just kind of a little designation to kind of help you out here. And as you're taking a sip of this Pinot Gris as well, some other things that wine professionals will look for when they're tasting wine is also the texture on the palate. So you'll notice when you take a sip of this Pinot Gris that your mouth might start to water a little bit. And if that is the case, that's a sign of acidity. And all wines have acidity in them. What we're really looking for is that the acidity is really balanced with the wine. It's not sticking out too much. You've probably all had like a lemonade that didn't have enough sugar and it was just way too acidic and way too sour. Well, then I would call that very out of balance, right? Because the acidity is too high. But in this case, of course, we have a little bit of that mouth-watering sensation, but it's not so much that it's really bothering us a lot, but you can feel it. So I hope you're all feeling that. All right, and it might take you kind of holding the wine in your mouth for a few seconds, which is good. All righty. Oh, I love Martha's comment here in the chat. She said, I'm not a fan of whites and she wants to love it, but I'm proud of you for trying it. And I love that you're being honest about it because you're not going to offend me. I know that everyone has their own like different types of like palates and everyone has their own preferences. And, my biggest thing whenever I tell people when they're wine tasting is that this is about really allowing yourself to kind of stop and smell the roses and really get to know something before you write it off or decide whether or not you like it. And so wine can surprise you. The more you sit with it, you may tend to like it more. The more you sit with it, you may tend to hate it more. Just sort of depends on what you're having. So I'm glad that you're still trying it. It makes me happy. Alrighty. And speaking of whites, let's go on to our next white wine. It's going to be the Riesling. So go ahead and pour yourself some of that Columbia Valley Riesling here. Right. So I mentioned the appellation here, or the region, I should say, region/appellation, and that is the Columbia Valley. So Columbia Valley is a wine region in Washington State that's in the bottom left, like southeast corner of the state. And it's on the eastern side of the Cascade Mountains. So you'll also notice on our labels here that we have all of these different mountain ranges illustrated, or mountain peaks illustrated on the labels. The Riesling is all about Mount Baker. And this is because, one, we're talking about, the wines of Washington State. And of course, we can't talk about the Columbia Valley without talking about the Cascade Mountains. And that's because the Cascade Mountains play a really big role in what makes Columbia Valley such a good place for grape growing. And that's because it actually casts a rain shadow on the area. So on the western side of the Cascade Mountains, we have Seattle, which we all know is very rainy. Maybe some of you are in Seattle. I'm not really sure where everyone is located here, but it's much more rainier on that side. And on the eastern side of the Cascade Mountains, we have the Columbia Valley, and it's dry. It's like they maybe get 6 to 8 inches of rain a year, which is really not a lot. I mean, by contrast, Napa Valley gets around 27 inches of rain a year. So it's a stark difference, but it's actually kind of a good thing, because grape growers will tell you that grapes grow best when they have to struggle a little bit. And that is because when grapes don't have all of the water in the world, they need to actually get their roots much deeper into the earth. And that's really good for absorbing a lot of nutrients. And it also means that you're not going to get as much crops of grapes, which is good, because when you're growing grapes to make wine, you really want quality over quantity. You want to have grapes that have a lot of nutrients and flavor to them, that are really rich, rather than a bunch of grapes that are just more mediocrely flavored, right? So having less leads to more concentration of the fruit, which leads to better wine. So all in all, that's really what makes, Washington State wines from the Columbia Valley area so delicious. So now we're moving into our Riesling here. And in looking at it, you'll notice right away that it is a much darker color than the Pinot Gris. So already I'm starting to assume that I'm probably going to get more intense aromas here. And I mean, beyond that, that's really all I can say. I mean, it's a white wine, it's got the color. It'd be hard to kind of tell exactly what this could be if you didn't know. So we're just kind of doing that on comparison. But as you are taking a sniff and a sip of your Riesling here, some typical Riesling aromas are things like honeysuckle, apricot, peach, honeydew, really a lot of very honey kind of aromas, and a little bit of floral as well. So really start to look for that in this wine. And I will say that Riesling also can be a kind of a misconstrued wine. I think it's easy to assume that it's always a sweet wine, and it doesn't have to be. And I think one of the reasons why most people assume it's a sweet wine is just because it often is made in a sweet style. And if you're getting into wine for the first time, it's a really easy one to start with, because having a little bit of that residual sugar in the wine actually makes it more palatable. So if you're new into wine and you're not ready for the big bold tannins of a red wine, starting with a Riesling is kind of really pleasant and fun. So if that's been your first introduction with wine and you had a sweet Riesling, you might not have gone back to explore it because you've been trying so many other awesome things. So no worries about that. But I will say that it doesn't always have to be sweet. And in our case, actually, we do have just a little hint of sweetness here. So as you're sipping, you may kind of notice a little bit of that on the palate. It kind of feels like a silkiness on your teeth, sort of like, the way a soda maybe would feel. But just know that the sugar that is in a wine, for example, a Riesling that has this specific Riesling that has a little bit in there isn't like an added sugar. It's a sugar that's coming from the grapes themselves. So whenever you're growing grapes, you're wanting them to get really ripe, to get to a really nice ripeness, because that means that there's enough sugar for yeast to eat and then turn into alcohol. But sometimes as you're going through your winemaking process, you might actually choose to stop the fermentation early so the yeast can't eat all of the sugar. And then that leaves a little bit left over to add a little bit of that sweetness to the wine and a little bit more body. So that's just kind of a winemaking choice. And honestly, for this Riesling, I think it really does well for it because it is quite acidic. You may feel your mouth really starting to water if you hold it back there, but that little touch of sweetness just keeps it from being a little bit too intense. All righty. Let's see. Oh, AJ here in the chat. I'm surprised this one is not as sweet. I usually don't go for Riesling because I find them to be overly sweet. Yeah, like I said, it's a kind of it's one of those grapes where that's oftentimes it's made like that, but it doesn't have to be. And so if you want to try Rieslings that aren't as overly sweet, start with Germany and kind of just explore the different areas there. They do make sweet wine, sweet Rieslings there, but you can find some nice dry Trocken, it's kind of the word for it, like the dry kind of wines. And like, and of course, if you're, especially if you're in Washington State or Oregon, like areas that have cooler weather that are more fit for Riesling because it needs cool weather to really grow. You can ask, different winemakers or people at wine stores and stuff like what isn't sweet, because there are some really nice ones. Yeah, they don't have to be overly sweet, so no worries. Awesome. Okay, so we've tasted through the first two wines. Now I'm curious, drop a 1 in the chat if you liked the Pinot Gris better, or a 2 in the chat if you liked the Riesling better. I'll put my vote in. Nice. Love it. I see a few more 2s than 1s. All right. Yeah, that Riesling's really palatable, really good. In terms of food pairings, the Riesling classically is like suggested to be paired with very aromatic foods because it is a very aromatic wine. You may have noticed when you went to sniff it that it wasn't that hard to smell. Kind of jumps out at you. And so Riesling is like classically said to pair well with things like Thai food, like lemongrass and ginger flavors, anything that has like even a little bit of spiciness to it. So like this Riesling having just a hint of like residual sugar in there would pair well with something a little bit spicy because the sugar is going to kind of counteract the spiciness of the food. So that's always a really great thing to explore with. Alrighty. Alrighty, everyone. So what questions do we have about wine so far? Just curious to see if anyone has anything. I'll take a little pause. All right.
I'm usually a red kind of person, but the white wine, it's really a good experience. The Pinot Gris is kind of a different kind of than the Pinot Grigio, like you were explaining. The Riesling, I have tried Riesling, the one from Australia, obviously, and it's a little different as well. This one, like I think somebody else said that it tasted a little bit sweeter than, and it is true. It has a little sweet kind of hint to it.
Yeah.
So I would prefer the Riesling over the Pinot Gris.
Nice. Yeah, the Pinot Gris doesn't tend to have as much of that like intense flavor. And so if you're looking for more flavor, Riesling is the way to go. It's for sure.
Definitely. Like I said, I'm a red person, but this was pretty good.
Nice. Yay.
Well, you have to find something to match, seafood and otherwise,
Exactly. I love that. Awesome. Alrighty. Well, I'm going to keep us going along then, and we'll get into some rosé. And, if you think of any questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. Actually, I see one coming in here from Yolanda. How do you ask for wines? Could you elaborate on your question a little bit? I'm not totally sure what you're asking. Oh, dry or sweet. Oh, okay. Like if you're at a store or something or at a restaurant. If you're like shopping, or even if you're at a restaurant and you want to have, maybe a white wine, you don't want it to be sweet. I think the best thing for people that are starting out to kind of know is that a lot of times wines can come across as like sweet. You can think they're sweet, but they're not. They're a dry wine, which just means that there's no residual sugar. But it's easy to use the term sweet because it may taste very, very fruity. So what I like to tell people is if you want a dry wine, but you still want to enjoy a lot of nice fruit flavors, if you're out shopping or you're at a restaurant, just say, I want a dry white, but I want it to have some nice, really powerful or really good fruit flavors. And I don't want to have any like sweetness, like sugar in the wine, but I want it to have sweet tasting fruit, like without being the sugar. So that's kind of a distinction that I like to tell people that are just exploring wine, because sometimes you can ask for like a bone, you could ask for the driest wine you want, and then it's like super, super bone dry. Like some whites that are very, very dry are just sometimes can be kind of tough. You need food with it. So you might be a little surprised. So I think saying like dry with some good fruit is a really good in between. And then if you say you want a sweet wine, like you're probably asking for like a dessert wine or something like that. So just know that what you're going to get suggested is probably going to be more of a dessert thing. So yeah.
Thank you.
Right. You're welcome. Alrighty. So next is going to be that Columbia Valley Rosé. Go ahead and pour yourself a little bit of that.
Dang.
Rosé.
One is lighter than the other one, ¿verdad?
No. All right. Yes. So if you've been to a winery before, you may have heard how rosé is made, but I'm going to just say it for everyone because we had a mixture of people that have been to wineries. So rosé often is assumed to be like a red and white wine mixed together, and that's not always the case. You know, sometimes people can do that. I will say that when that happens, that's sort of like maybe more of like a last minute decision, or it's something where they are, you know, intentionally wanting to make a rosé, but they wanted to use, you know, some white grapes in there. Sometimes they'll blend a red and a white. But for the most part, when a winemaker is intentionally deciding to make a rosé, just as, you know, in the case that we have here, they will make sort of a halfway red wine. So how you do this is you pick your grapes, and you're going to be picking red grapes because you're making a rosé. And you take your red grapes into the winery and you crush them. And when you crush them, the juice that comes out is clear, and it's always clear, really, no matter the grape skin color, which is kind of a fun fact. You can even explore this with table grapes. So if you ever like crush like a red grape you'd buy at the grocery store, the juice will be clear. So it's kind of like this similar thing for wine grapes. But what actually gives like red wines and rosés its color is the grape skins itself. So if you're having if you're making a rosé here, you're basically crushing your grapes, letting the juice out. The juice is actually what ferments to become wine. And you put all of your juice in a big stainless steel tank for rosé. And then you leave those grape skins in. The grape skins all kind of float to the top. And so you leave the grape skins in with juice for maybe about like 1 to 2 hours, up to like 2 days. It really just depends on how much flavor and how like dark you want the rosé color to be, because that can, you know, the longer the grape skins are on there, the darker the color, and it can also add more like intense flavor just coming out of the grape skins. But basically, after like a short amount of time, you'll take the grape skins away, leaving behind this light pink colored wine, and then it'll finish fermenting just as that. And so if you wanted to make a red wine, all you would do is just leave those grapes in the wine on top fermenting, and it would just become a red wine. So kind of a fun fact, that's how it's done. And I think it adds a new appreciation for rosé as well. So take a little sniff of your rosé here. And you'll notice that there's quite a few aromas in here, and we actually have a blend of grapes. So rosé can be made with either one type of red grape variety or multiple types blended together. And in our case, from the Columbia Valley in Washington, we have about 50% Cabernet Sauvignon and about 26% Cabernet Franc, 13% Grenache, and then a bunch of other grape varieties that kind of make up that remaining small percentage. So Cabernet Sauvignon being 50% of the blend, that means we're probably going to get a lot of our flavors from that. And the other grape varieties that are sort of the lesser parts of the blend here, they are more added in to add like structure, like tannin, not tannins for in this case, I'm getting ahead of myself, like structure in terms of like body and acidity and all that kind of stuff. So that's why those are usually blended in, and just probably for flavor as well. So anyway, take a sniff. You'll notice with the rosé that it's got kind of a lovely, right off the bat, like strawberry aroma. Like it's not too intense, with a little bit of strawberry, but it's kind of got these interesting melon flavors as well. So you'll notice things like cantaloupe, maybe a little bit of rose hips, kind of a little bit of floral notes. So there's a lot going on here. And I think that's kind of taking us back to the fact that we are talking about the Columbia Valley. So we're getting a little bit of a cooler climate, which can lead to some of these more melon kind of floral aromas in the rosé. All righty. So I'm curious, is anyone getting any other aromas or any comments about the wine here in the chat? You can drop them in, or feel free to unmute, no problem. Okay. Okay, we have some comments that it's too acidic. Yes, it is. It's definitely a dry rosé. It's got a lot of bright acidity to it. There is no residual sugar in here at all, so it's definitely going to stick out. Raspberry and blackberry. Ooh, yep, I can agree with that. Oh, tastes similar to the Pinot Gris. Yeah, it is definitely a lighter rosé. I think that's a fun comment. It's also, maybe it's a rosé that needs a little bit of food with it, so you could do like really any kind of cheese. Just not, I mean, no, I shouldn't say that. I wouldn't do an aged cheese. I wouldn't do a blue cheese with this, but I would, well, maybe could do blue cheese. Sort of depends on the type of blue cheese. But yeah, like any sort of like lighter, even like creamy to kind of even hard cheeses would be really fun with this. So that could be something to explore if you're, I will say that when you eat cheese, because cheese coats your tongue, it will make the wine more palatable and probably not taste as acidic, because the cheese is coating your palate and the acidity won't just be as intense. So kind of a fun fact, if you're ever, having a little, you need to get rid of some wine, serve some cheese with it, and people will like eat it and drink it right up. Yeah. All righty. All right. So for this, so for this rosé here, we fermented this in a stainless steel tank. So that's what leads to this very refreshing style of rosé. If we would have done, an oak barrel instead, and then it would be a little bit heavier and have a lot more body to it and probably have some more oak flavors. So in this case, for the most part, rosés are going to be, made in a stainless steel tank just because you want to preserve as much of the fresh fruit flavors as possible. All righty, so we have a comment here in the chat. Riesling is good with Mykonos garlic herb vegan cheese. Oof, nice. I gotta get myself some of that. I haven't tried that yet, but I love that brand. Cool. Yeah, it's gonna be good. I love that. And is anyone else having any other cheeses? I mean, cheese and wine is like classic, just like I said, because of the creaminess and then the acidity of the wine kind of counteracting it is one of those things that makes it good. But if you're having any other snacks, it doesn't have to be cheese. Feel free to drop in the chat. Tell us what is tasting good, because it gives us all inspiration for, the rest of our wines later this week. Okay. All right, so we're gonna move into reds in just a moment. And if you're a red wine fan, put a 5 in the chat. Why not? Let's do a 5. I'm a red wine fan. Okay, lots of 5s. Expecting some more to come in here. Oh yeah, strawberries being good with the rosé. Yep, I could see that being really good. Absolutely. Yeah, so I will say, kind of fun fact, most of the time on tastings, and just people that I meet in general, more people are red wine drinkers than they are white wine drinkers, or maybe they're bigger fans of reds, I should say, rather than one or the other. But I don't know. That's just kind of a thing that I've noticed, which is kind of fun. All right, so we're you'll notice that we're moving in a pretty specific order throughout the tasting today. We're starting with the whites. We did our most light white wine first, then we went to our heavier white wine, we went to our rosé. Now we're getting into red, and we're going to start off with a lighter bodied red wine, and that's going to be the Cabernet Franc. So go ahead and pour yourself that one. I'll put in the chat because we have 2 cabs here, so we're on the Cabernet Franc now. And Cabernet Franc is, we're having it first because it's the lightest of the 3 reds we're going to have today. And whenever you're tasting, you always want to taste from the least intense flavor to the most intense flavored, and like the lightest in color to darkest if you really aren't sure, and also like no tannins to tannins. And so we're moving in this direction because each wine that we have is not going to overpower the one that's next. And so it's always good to do that, because then you don't ever have to change your glass. You can kind of keep tasting throughout. So you'll see that with really any tasting that you do anyplace. Okay, so getting into the Cabernet Franc here, we are talking about the Walla Walla Valley. That is where this one is from. And we're still in the same area. The Walla Walla Valley is actually sort of a subsection kind of carved out of the Columbia Valley. And that's just because that's a slightly different soil content, maybe a little bit different like weather over the years and stuff. And so that's why it's designated as a separate place. But I think one of the most fun facts about the Walla Walla Valley is that it's actually known for, 1, delicious red wine, which is why we're having a Cab Franc from there. And 2, it's got these jumbo-sized sweet onions that you can eat because they're very low in sulfur. You just eat them like an apple, which is just crazy to me. I haven't gotten to visit the Walla Walla Valley and try it, but it's on my list. And I will say, I promise there won't be any onion flavors in the wine, so don't worry. Don't worry about that. All right. So we're getting into Cab Franc. That's our next one here. Give everyone a moment. All right. So with Cab Franc, it's actually traditionally grown in Bordeaux, France. It's kind of where it originated. It's always in those Bordeaux blends, just in different amounts, depending on, who's making the wine, what vineyard we're talking about. But it's a great variety that likes a little bit cooler climate. It does better in places that are, have good, just like, I don't know. I guess the best way to describe it is like Washington State being a cooler climate just really does well for Cabernet Franc because it doesn't want to get too hot or ripen too quickly. And so it's kind of its home there, I feel personally, because it tastes real good. So as you're kind of picking it up here and taking a sniff, some things you'll notice about the Cabernet Franc is that we're getting a little bit of like black and red fruits. So we have some black cherry, a little bit of just regular cherry, maybe some blackberry in there, but also some extra aromas that are just coming from the land and from the grape variety itself. So we have some herbal aromas, a little bit of earth. So if you're getting that earthiness, or maybe a little bit of like a little green peppercorn or something, that's totally on par with what we should expect here. All right. So I'm curious, how are people liking the Cab Franc? I either get like loves or I get not so sures. So feel free to like write in the chat or unmute right now if you want to share, if you have questions. Martha's she's pondering this, I can tell. I love it. That's what I look like when I'm tasting. I'm just like,
It's not bad, actually. I'm actually liking this one.
Yeah, that's awesome. Have you had a Cabernet Franc before?
Not a Franc. No, not a Franc.
Yeah, I would say it's probably not as common. Well, it's definitely not as common as Cabernet Sauvignon, just because it's a little bit harder to grow, a little more temperamental in the sense that it just likes a little bit more cooler weather, whereas Cabernet Sauvignon can really thrive anywhere. So sometimes you just don't see it by itself, but I will say when you can get it by itself, it's pretty good.
It's almost like a bold
This
wine.
one, a Pinot. Oh, so sorry, Maria.
No, I'm sorry, Martha. It was almost like a bold wine. It's kind of like, it's really, it's almost strong, but not really. And it has this, I don't know, it just follows this nice taste. Your taste buds are just like, wow.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry about that, Martha.
How does this compare with a Pinot?
I would say the Pinot Noir would be a little bit lighter. It would have more red fruit flavors, and it would have some earthiness to it, sort of depending on where it's grown, but it's going to be a little bit later. I think Cab Franc can kind of toe the line of like light, but also a bolder wine, like it could go with some heavier meats if you wanted it to. And I think the Cab Franc is going to be showing more tannins than the Pinot Noir probably would. Ooh, so Yolanda has a great suggestion to try, if you have a spicy cheese with this Cabernet Franc, and you'll really get a lot of flavor. I believe that. That's awesome. Okay.
Yeah, my boys over here, my son and my husband are having a great time with this one.
Awesome. Oh, it's great. Yeah, if you've never had it before, it's something you might not totally be sure about, but it, just kind of let yourself, kind of enjoy it, take little sips and see what you think. On the palate, you'll notice that it's not too heavy in body. And so if you're trying to determine the body of a wine, you're looking for really how the weight of it in your mouth. So does it, does it feel more like water, which is more a light bodied wine, or does it feel more like orange juice in terms of weight and like kind of the thickness that you can feel with your tongue? Then that would be a medium bodied wine. And then a full bodied wine would be more of like a coffee creamer or something, just have a little more weight to it. So that's kind of like a very extreme spectrum of like what to look for when you're trying to determine body. But that's like kind of a way to help you get started. I mean, the best way is really to compare a bunch of wines. So, you can go through after or later if you have another glass. You could even compare all three reds. Just take little sips and kind of just feel for the body, which is cool. Ooh, we have another spicy cheese match with this one. I haven't had spicy cheese with this, but I think I need to try it. So we have the Daya vegan jalapeno Havarti cheese. Sounds amazing. We have a lot of vegans on here. This is great. Or lactose intolerant. I'm sort of on the border of that. Sometimes I am, sometimes I'm not. I like it. Some other great food pairings with this Cabernet Franc too would be, I think like green olives could be really fun. Something kind of like salty, little that olive earthiness to it. Of course, like even like lighter meats, you could do like a roast pork with this. You could do some like mushroom dishes, like a mushroom like risotto or a beef stroganoff, like something like that would be really good too. So there's a lot of options here. Oh, and we have a comment here about the taste doesn't match the smell. Yeah, that's common. I think most wines that people like that you'll have will just be a little bit different than kind of what you expect with the smell. I think as a generalization, your European wines and wines that are made in a European style will always smell a little bit like fresh and fruitier, but then not taste as like fruity as you expect. Whereas I feel that sometimes your like American wines will actually like have that fruitiness that you smell. So it's kind of like a fun sort of like dichotomy there, but that's a really big generalization. That's not always the case, but anyway, I like to share that because it's interesting. All righty. All right, everyone. So we are just about to move into our last two wines, and those are going to be the Merlot first, and then the Cabernet Sauvignon. So go ahead and, keep enjoying that the Cab Franc if you still have in your glass. But if you're ready to move on to the next one, Merlot is next. So go ahead and have some Merlot. So we're still in the Walla Walla Valley here for the Merlot, just like that Cabernet Franc. And something that I want to point out just about Washington State that I think is really good to know is that Washington State is really known for its Merlots and Cabernet Sauvignons. And that's because of the climate and like it's a little bit cooler, which Cabernet Sauvignon and Merlot sometimes will like to have a little bit of warmer weather, like not overly warm, but they do well in all places, really, like many places. But in a cooler climate where you have like cooler temperatures, which means that your grapes are going to ripen slowly, but you have nice, like a lot of really great sunshine which means that the grapes are going to ripen well. That slow ripening with the intense sunshine creates a very concentrated grape, which means that you're going to get a very concentrated wine. And that's really what Washington's I always kind of like to compare it to like, those Concord grape juice, like the true Concord grape juice that's very concentrated. That's kind of what we're getting out with the wines here. Now, they're not going to taste like grape juice, I promise, but they're going to have that intensity, which is really cool. So getting into Merlot here, Merlot is another great variety that is classically grown in Bordeaux as well. It's kind of its origin place. And as a fun fact, all three reds are actually related genetically. So Cabernet Franc is the parent, one of the parents of both Merlot and Cabernet Sauvignon. So if we taste any similar aromas through these, that's kind of why. I mean, they're all very much their own thing, but for some reason, there's this one compound in these grapes called a pyrazine, and it's just like part of the grape. It's nothing bad, but basically it just produces a green pepper smell. So if you've been picking up that green pepper aroma, you're totally on par, and you might get it with all three, but if you don't, that's also fine too. It kind of presents in different ways. So kind of a fun fact. Okay, we have a vote already that this one is better than the Franc. Woohoo! All right, so as you're sniffing the Merlot here, Merlot is known as a very dark, soft, and plummy grape. So you'll see that the color of this is definitely more of a purpley red rather than a red, which always kind of hints to us that we're going to smell more of those red or dark fruit flavors. And so as you're taking a sniff, some things you're going to be looking for are like plum, blackberry, black currant. And the other thing I want to kind of point out here is we're getting into now some oak barrels being used on the wine. So if you're smelling things like vanilla or baking spices, excuse me, that is actually a sign of the oak barrels that were used. And we did use oak barrels on this, I promise. We fermented initially in stainless steel tanks, and then we aged the wine, the Merlot, in oak barrels for a little bit before bottling. So that's why you're getting some of those oak flavors. So I'm curious, is anyone getting those oak flavors in the wine? Feel free to write a yes in the chat or just unmute if you want to like talk about it, whatever works. Ooh, Brings out the flavor of orange dark chocolate. Yep. Yeah. Even like an orange, like orange, like dark chocolate covered oranges could be fun with this. I don't know. Yeah, I think some other classic pairings you can get with Merlot, maybe not classic, but like things that I would think would taste really good would be like macaroni and cheese, just because it's so creamy and like soft. And the Merlot is very soft, and like the dark fruits with the cheese would be so good. Also, like a braised short rib. So, kind of having something a little bit barbecue flavored would be really good. And any sort of caramelized vegetable, like caramelized onion, like, oh, it'd be so good. Yes, I love the comment here, but another friendly one. Absolutely. I would say Merlot is like one of those red wines that's a little bit easier to get into because it is very rich in fruit, like it's very fruity and it's very soft typically. So it's not going to be too harsh in tannins really ever. It's just not really its characteristic. So it's a really great, easy wine to drink. Like it's good stuff. So I'm glad that you guys are finding this one nice and pleasant. It's awesome. All right. So what wine questions do you all have? I'm curious if there's anything that people are dying to ask. Favorite so far. Yay. I love it. Awesome. All right. Well, if there are any wine questions yet, feel free to drop them in the chat if you want, and we'll get on to our last wine. Oh my gosh, we've made it. But we still have plenty to talk about, so get ready. So our last one's going to be the Cabernet Sauvignon. Let's go ahead and pour yourself a little bit of that one. So Cabernet Sauvignon is basically like, it's the king in California. It's the most planted grape variety in the world, kind of because it just does well everywhere. Like it just thrives everywhere. It's sort of like Chardonnay, where you can kind of grow it anywhere and it presents a different flavor, but it still thrives. And so in our case, we're having a cooler climate, Chardonnay or Cabernet Sauvignon here. Wow, I'm losing my mind on what I'm talking about. So we have a little bit of, so this one is a little bit more, it's going to be a little bit of a cooler climate style Cabernet Franc. So it's not going to be maybe as big and bold and intense as what you would expect from like a Napa Valley Cabernet Sauvignon. But we still have a good amount of alcohol here. So we're at 14.2%. Which is what we'd call about high alcohol. So if you're trying to rank alcohol percentages and what's low, medium, and high, your low is going to be anything below like 12%. Your medium's like 12 to 13.5, and then your high alcohol is like 14 and up. So just kind of a fun thing to note. Okay. All right, and so as we jump into this wine, I see a question here in the chat about the wine 101, the tasting. So we'll go back to those 5 steps. So for the 5 steps to wine tasting, we have see, swirl, sniff, sip, and savor. So I'll even like put those in the chat here. So see, let's see, swirl, sniff, here comes 4, sip, and savor. Okay, so those are your 5. And when we're looking at the cab here, we'll start off with this. In the glass, it's sort of it's got some like darker purpley tones to it. So I would say it's obviously a red wine with like a slight purplish tint. And whenever I see that, I'm always thinking, okay, we're gonna have probably some, dark fruit flavors here. And then of course, when you're swirling it in your glass, that's really allowing the aromas to open. Now, Cabernet Sauvignon being a grape variety that typically has a lot of intense flavor because it has very thick grape skins. And because of those thick grape skins, it also has more tannins than other grape varieties. It's really good to actually aerate your wine a little bit so that looks like swirling the glass. It also looks like, even pouring your glass of wine out and then letting it sit for maybe 10 or 15 minutes before you even start to take a sip or drink it, just because that allows more aromas to release out of the wine. And then your 3rd step is going to be to sniff. So go ahead and take a sniff here. And Cabernet Franc or Cabernet Sauvignon, so many Cabernets today. So Cabernet Sauvignon is known to have a mixture of red and dark fruits. And I would feel like the most part, a lot of times it does show more dark fruit flavors. So if you're smelling things like blackberry, black currant, those are definitely on par with the Cabernet Sauvignon. But you can also look for other things too, like maybe there's a little bit of that green pepper herbalness to the Cabernet Sauvignon, because that's just sort of part of the what I talked about earlier, those pyrazines, which is just a compound that creates that green pepper aroma in wine. I don't know. It's just something that happens. But you could be seeing some of those herbal aromas. And it's actually interesting. And I don't really get it so much out of this Cabernet Sauvignon. But if you were to have a Cabernet Sauvignon from like Barossa Valley in Australia, it picks up more of a eucalyptus or mint kind of aroma as well. So kind of a fun fact, just something to look for. Yes. And okay, so that was kind of the sniff portion. And the other thing to look for when you're sniffing this wine is also the oak vanilla notes. So we did use some oak barrels here on the wine. We did ferment in stainless steel tanks, and then we aged it for a little bit in oak barrels. But I think the big difference between the Merlot and the Cabernet Sauvignon here is that the oak and the vanilla doesn't stick out as much. It's a little more integrated with the wine. And so it's more of like a marriage. So I would just kind of look for that, because I think that really nice integration is something that really kind of adds a lot of quality to this wine and makes it like really well balanced. Okay. All right. So when you're going to taste, we talked about a few different things that you can look for on the palate, but I'll kind of put them all in one list so that we can have a sense here. But when you're tasting wine, you're going to be looking also for how it feels in your mouth and the texture. And I mentioned that earlier, but those like 5 or 6 things that you're going to be making sure are in balance are things like acidity, putting in the chat, sweetness, which this wine is a dry wine, so we're not talking about sweetness here. We have body, which I talked about, tannins, which I'll describe in a second. We have the alcohol content, and then we also have the flavors, which are typical, kind of similar, could be a little bit different to what you're smelling, and then of course the length or finish. And that is the kind of like how long those pleasant fruit aromas last on your palate. So we talked earlier about what acidity feels like, what sweetness and body feel like, but tannins are that texture that you're getting on your tongue that feels like you licked dust or something like that. People always nod their heads when I say that. I saw some people laugh, like everyone must have eaten like dirt or dust at some point, because everyone knows what I'm talking about whenever I say that. So that's what you're feeling, that texture. But tannins are actually like these little compounds in the grape skins of wine grapes. And when you're making a red wine, they show up because you're fermented the wine with the grape skins. And so tannins are basically I call them like these little thirsty little guys, because they like to absorb moisture. So they will basically take whatever moisture is around them and kind of rip it off your tongue. So that's as you're sipping wine, that's why you're losing all of that moisture off your tongue and you're getting that like tacky, dusty feeling. So that's why you're getting that. And tannins can have different quantities. If you feel them all over your mouth, in your gums, then that would be like a highly tannic wine. If it doesn't feel that intense, like a Pinot Noir, for example, it's much more subtle. That'd be like a lighter tannins. So just something to look for. And I will say, of the 3 reds we had today, this Cabernet Sauvignon probably shows the most tannins and the most kind of prickliness, but it's still not overdone. Like you could still have it by itself, but those tannins are actually what makes Cabernet Sauvignon so good with food, especially meat like steak, because they act not only as like a moisture sort of, taker, but they also cleanse your palate from like fat and proteins. And so that's why it's always classically paired with steak, because it's like the perfect match. So yeah, so that's what you're looking for there. And then if you really want to get deeper on your analysis, you can look for the alcohol and really it's kind of hard for me personally. I kind of look for only if it's high alcohol. It's the only thing I really kind of look for to notice, because it's more noticeable. So high alcohol will feel like a little burn in your throat, or kind of like a burn in the back of your nose. Just like if you were to take a shot of liquor, it's that same feeling, it's alcohol. But if you feel that in a wine, then it's higher alcohol. So this being 14.2%, you might feel a little bit of it. It's not going to be as intense as like, having an actual shot of like vodka or something, but it might give you a little sense of that. So that's just something to look for too. And, overall, all of those things I wrote in the chat and what I just walked us through in terms of like what we're looking for on our palate, that is The goal of any like wine taster or any professional person that's, ranking a wine or giving it a point score, they are looking to make sure all of those components are in balance as well. So that's like kind of part of the analysis of determining whether the wine is quality or not. And, the most important thing though, of course, is also just deciding whether or not you like it. Like that's kind of, for me, that's the last thing I'm like thinking about. I'm like, okay, do I actually like this? Like, is this something I would continue to drink? And, that's kind of, I would even say the most important thing because, life's too short to drink wine you don't like. So I hope that at least, you guys found something in this collection that you've enjoyed. So I'm kind of curious, feel free to unmute or you can write in the chat. What was your favorite wine tonight? What was your favorite? I need to know. I'll put mine in. Mine was the Cab Franc. I was into that.
Huh.
I like
Definitely the Cabernet Sauvignon.
Oh, nice. Nice. Elizabeth, what about you?
We like the Merlot.
Yeah, that one's so good. I mean, they're all good. It's hard to choose. Nice. Love that. Yeah, the Merlot, I think would be the best one with like chocolate, like Halloween candy, just because it is the softest. Yeah, it's the softest. Good.
See all the trick-or-treat candies behind us.
Yep.
Chocolate.
Dangerous.
Which one was the one that goes great with candy corn?
Oh, candy corn. I don't know. I mean, you could probably do Merlot because it's just more fruity. You could try the Riesling, but candy corn I think would be better with like an oaky, buttery Chardonnay because it's got that same similar flavor. Could be kind of fun. All right. Well, we've come to the end of our tasting here, and I'm going to drop in the chat just a little more info about In Good Taste. If you guys ever want to follow up with us, or you want to get more wine, or you need to contact someone about wine in general, feel free to always reach out. I put that in the chat here. We always give people a discount code whenever you taste with us too, as like a thank you. So it's all in the chat. But I always like to say, if you had a question and you couldn't quite think of it, or you were unsure, feel free to email me later. I'm always responding to my emails. I can always help you out if you have any wine questions. And once you taste with me, I am your personal, kind of pocket som. So don't hesitate to reach out and really just thank you for being here. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you very much, Kim. And I'm just going to remind people, if you have any questions, contact us or contact Kim. We're happy to put you together. I'm going to put we're going to ask people at the end, and we're going to send it to you as an email, but I'm going to post essentially on the chat room a questionnaire about, how it went, things we could do differently, anything we can, because we're thinking about doing it again. We'd like your feedback. So that'd be terrific. And it's interesting. So I am not a wine drinker, which is why I kind of sat out, but I've hosted I've put these together for alumni associations a couple of times. And I discovered that I essentially am a sweet wine person. And as you said, the most important thing is, what do you like? And, I was just learned, like, forget all the talk of, it's dry, it's this, it's that. If you like sweet wine, that's the wine you like. Yeah. And so now I will do the blended red and white. What is the
rosé?
Rosé. So that's the one, like if I'm out and people are drinking wine, I will ask for a rosé because then I can finish the glass because I actually like it. So yes, so that was fascinating. Yeah, so I want to thank you again for doing this. And as I said, it's our first time. So folks, while you're here, letting you know, what we're thinking about doing next is doing this as gifts to people over the holidays. So the actual event would be in mid to late January, but you could give the gift to people over the holidays so they could look forward to it. And then in January, we would do one again with you all, with friends, people that you do, and other alums. So just putting that out there right now. All right. So yeah. Again, please go ahead and cut and paste did I send that? Did everybody get the link for let me just do this again. There we go. Yes, the link for the questionnaire. If you can cut and paste that, we'll send it to you as an email. Anybody have any questions or anything before we go? Wrap it up. Thank you, Kim. Thank you, everybody who joined us. And have a great weekend, folks.
All right. Bye, everyone. Thank you. See you later.
Thank you, Kim.
You're welcome. Have a good night.
You
Enjoy
too.
your mind.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank
You're
you.
welcome.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Okay, so we can go out.
Let's see, where's the chat? That's where the link is for the questionnaire. Do you want to do the questionnaire?
Maybe they'll email it out too.
I will email it out to you all just to be sure.
Thank you, Kevin.
Kevin.
Okay,
And Kevin,
absolutely.
we missed like a little bit of it. Will we be able to see this again?
Yes,
or not?
that's why we recorded it. So we'll send it to you and you can watch from whatever you missed.
Oh,
And pick it
good.
up when you come in, so you can hear the whole thing.
Perfect.
Yay.
Okay?
Thank you. Thank you for
Thanks,
doing this. It
Kevin.
was so much fun.
Yeah, it was
Great. I'm glad. It's our first time trying something like this. So we will do it again.
It was great. Thank you.
Take
so
care.
much.
Okay, thanks. Bye-bye.